Congratulations, you've just received an offer from a potential buyer. So what happens now? Well, if you've got an agent, if you're working with an agent, they should explain the process to you. But if you're not and you're selling your own home, then you may need the process explaining to you in a little bit more detail. So let me start off with just talking to you about the contract itself, that offer contract. Read it. Read it really thoroughly. There are going to be lots of interesting things in there, such as the requirements that the buyer has, or rather the requests. Things like appliances, or they might request certain, repairs to have been made before they actually purchase the property. But they also this contract contains dates, and there's really important dates. It contains dates for escrow, it contains inspection period, it contains a closing date. They're really, really important, and these are binding dates. These are dates that you've agreed to. So if your closing date is set for 45 days, and then in 43 days you turn around and say, oh, actually, do you know what, I can't leave right now. Unfortunately, that's a legally binding contract that you're going to sign. So I need you to ensure that you agree with everything in that contract before you sign the contract. So before you sign it, you have this negotiation period where you can go back to the buyer and you can say to the buyer, I don't necessarily agree with this, but I do agree with this, and I'm okay with this, and can we change this date to X? Okay? That's what you're doing during that negotiation period. And once you've reached a point where you're both in agreement with all of the terms and conditions of the contract, then you will sign that contract. Okay? But make sure, as I said, that you get to know the contract first. The other thing that the contract's going to do is it's going to outline, it's not going to tell you, but it's going to outline some of your legal obligations. Because once you've signed that contract, you have some legal obligations. Not everything is down to the buyer. For instance, you have an obligation to complete certain disclosures, such as a seller's disclosure, which is a disclosure where you will talk about any permits, where you will disclose any issues that you may have had with the property, any repairs that you may have had done with the property. You may also have, depending on the age of the property and the type of property, you may have a radon gas disclosure, you may have a lead-based paint disclosure. Check the contract, because the contract will tell you, well, for the most part, what you need to do. But also, this is where I do advise you to, if you're not working with your own seller's agent, then speak to the buyer's agent, because they are going to insist that they are given to the buyer. So it's really important that those disclosures are made. Then you also have a legal obligation to allow access to your home. Unfettered access or unhindered access to your home for inspections. Completely unhindered. That means that you can't tell these inspectors that are coming into your home what cupboard not to look in, or you can't tell them that they can't have access to the attic. You can't tell them that they can't have access to the garage. These inspectors, and there are going to be a few types of inspectors. There's going to be a home inspector. There's going to be potentially a termite or WDO inspection. There's going to be an inspection on the septic tank if you have one. So you're also going to have a mortgage appraiser as well. And these inspectors will have to be allowed unhindered access to your home. They're going to be climbing on the roof. They're going to be going into the attic. They're going to be looking behind cabinets. They're going to be looking in cabinets. They're going to be looking in absolutely every single nook and cranny in your home, and you are not able to refuse that. If you refuse that, then the seller can pull out of that purchase. Okay, so you do have to allow access, and that's really, really important. I know a lot of for sale by owners, people sell in their own home that don't realize that they have to legally allow the inspector to have access to their home. And that also goes for the mortgage appraisal. Now, the mortgage appraisal may seem to you to be just another inspection when you've already had one, but it's not. The other inspections were done by the buyer. The mortgage appraisal is an inspection that is done by the lender to ensure that actually your property can be, it can get a mortgage, it can be lent on. So once all of the inspections have happened, during that time, you're still in the inspection period, which means that the buyer could at any point in time say, I don't like what's on the inspections, so therefore I'm going to pull out. Or the lender could say, actually, the home is not worth the value for whatever reason, and therefore we're not lending X amount of money, or the amount of money needed to purchase the home. So during that inspection period, expect to get some comments back from the buyer, some requests back that say, oh, we'd like this repaired, or we'd like this remodeled. Now, those requests, I just want you to understand that these are not necessarily buyer requests. They may be lender requests, and they might actually be requirements. For instance, if there's an issue with the roof, the lender will insist, it won't be a request, the lender will insist that the roof is either repaired or replaced. And the buyer doesn't have an option on this, because if that repair does not happen, then they won't get the money. They won't get the mortgage to be able to buy your home. So be aware that sometimes the requests that come from buyers during this period are not actually buyer requests. They're requests that the mortgage company is forcing the buyers to make. So once you've negotiated what repairs and what changes are going to be made, then at that point in time, the rest really is down to the buyer and down to the lending company. What's left for you to do is to arrange for a removal company and to arrange for any repairs that you have agreed to make and any changes you've agreed to make. And of course, you've got the rest of the contract period to ensure that that happens. Now, like I've said, you've got legal obligations. So if the closing date is set for a Monday, let's say the 13th of May, for instance, if that's the closing date that's set, then you need to be out of the home by that closing date. And just before the closing day, so usually the day before the closing or maybe the morning of closing, that buyer will have access to your home, because they will do what they call a final walkthrough, which with their agent, they will walk through to ensure that everything is exactly as it was promised, that you haven't removed the washer and dryer because you'd promised that you would leave them. They were part of the contract. So it's important that during that final walkthrough, that everything is as when the buyer walks into their new home. In other words, you have to ensure that at that point in time, the home is ready for the buyer. And as I've already said, you can't just say, oh, by the way, I can't manage today, so it's going to be in a week's time. No, you've signed a legally binding document, so it's really worth being aware of that. After that, your only obligation is to attend closing. Now, a lot of closings are done remotely, so you can have a remote closing, but it's important that before you have a remote closing, that the keys to the home are deposited with the title company. So that's the keys and anything else, such as garage door openers or gate openers, that sort of thing. They must be deposited with the title company. And if you're doing a remote closing, then just be aware that your forms will be sent to you and they will need to be notarized. So they will need to be witnessed and notarized. If you're out of the country and you're selling, say, your investment home, then don't forget about FIRPTA. That's an obligation, a legal obligation that you have, and I actually have another video on that. But you will also have to have your papers signed, witnessed, and notarized by a lawyer within your country as well. And then at that point in time, we're all good to close. And at closing, then the deeds are signed, they are exchanged, and your home is officially sold. And congratulations, but you are moving on to the new chapter in your life. So with this information, I hope that you're able to have a smooth home sale. But if you do need any more information, then by all means leave a comment, or you can find me on Facebook at Joe Peacock Realtor.